This video is something I originally posted around 6 years ago, and of course you'll see that the quality isn't great, but the topic is really interesting in that it talks about the discovery of Pluto and then the process of naming it, which is a really fascinating area of experience around the matter of synchronicities, because you probably know that astronomers discover planets and then they themselves name them, but very ironically, even though they generally don't like astrology and sometimes will even criticize it very forcefully as old wives' tales and things that couldn't possibly work. And yet, in that case, they would be well advised to, for example, label the planets through a number or some kind of scientific terminology. But no, what they do is they look for mythical figures, mythical archetypes. And so this is a great example of this, because back in the 1930s, it was discovered by an American astronomer. They were looking for a name. Apparently Minerva was under consideration, but it had been taken probably by an asteroid or some such thing. So then it turned out that a friend of this astronomer, someone in the UK, his daughter, who happened to be into this kind of thing at the time, she was very young, she suggested, why don't they call it Pluto, because it's really far out there and it's really cold, etc., etc. And so Pluto was named. Now what is fascinating is that it is Pluto. It's absolutely Pluto, the lord of the underworld, including all the possible correlations. Now what becomes even more fascinating is when you look at her chart, the chart of this young girl. Now there's no time known, just the birth date. But even with that, you see that she's born, she herself is born with the sun very close to Pluto, but such that what was going to happen in transit was that Pluto was behind the sun. So the Pluto moved toward the sun, and it made a perfect conjunction in transit around the time when she named or proposed the name for the planet. After that, Pluto moves beyond those degrees. She lived to be, I think, somewhere near 80 years of age. But the critical thing is, she never became a mythologist or got into astronomy or astrology or any such thing. She became something like an accountant, entirely different field. So in that sense, the experience is totally fortuitous, but it is also absolutely, clear that it's a massive, massive synchronicity in terms of all of these things coming together at that time. All right, enjoy the video. It's short, and as I say, quality isn't great, but it should be good enough to put forth a message. Here we have a story about the planet Pluto, ruler of great change and transformation, among many other things. And this planet was discovered February 18th, 1930 by American astronomer Clyde Tombaugh. And at the time, there was some argument about what to name the planet. And as it turns out, a fellow by the name of Falconer Madden, who had connections to the astronomical community, asked his granddaughter, Venetia Burney, what she thought they should name the planet. And the reason is Venetia had an interest in mythology, and Venetia thought they should name it Pluto because it's very far away and very solitary and so on. And so Falconer made the suggestion to the powers that be, and after some argument and some rejection of other names, such as, for example, Minerva, names that had been taken up by other asteroids, finally, May 1st, 1930, Pluto was in fact named Pluto. Now what is interesting is, if we look at Venetia's chart, we see that without a time, because no time is known, she has Pluto in the same sign as her sun, about 12.5 degrees away, which is just enough to prevent what is known as combustion. Planets that are too close to the sun become harmed by the sun in terms of their strength. You could argue that this might still be considered combust, but I would consider it far enough away that it's probably okay. However, we don't know where it is in terms of rising, setting, culminating, so there's no way to know about other strengths for this planet. We do know, however, that it's in her sun sign, and we know that at the time of birth they're separated by those degrees, but then we look at the ephemeris and we see that around the time of her suggestion, Pluto had reached the degrees of conjunction to her sun. Here it looks like it's a little bit before, but already prior to this it had reached the degrees. So effectively it was a conjunction. So Pluto had gotten to the sun. This is one of those delightful coincidences that you see in astrology, and it's in fact the great power of astrology, the great meaning that such things can actually happen. Now, going forward, although she became an accountant, mathematician, economist, teacher, this was her claim to fame, her connection to Pluto. She died in 2009 when Pluto had reached the beginning degrees of Capricorn, which put it almost opposite to its initial position. This is something that happens quite a bit to people in the 20th century because Pluto normally travels in a 250-year orbit, and so you would think it would take 125 years to reach the opposition, but many people have this opposition in their 90s, and Pluto being a tremendous change agent, that is often a point when a person at that age will die because of Pluto's connections to great change and transformation, and that's in fact what happened to her. So there you have it. This is a really interesting anecdote about Pluto.